We are going live on YouTube here in just a moment. Hello! Good Thursday afternoon to you. How's everybody doing today? I am doing fine and dandy. It's good to see you all. Hope everyone is well. So, yeah, let's talk a little bit about Greyhawk today. Let us commence to commencing talking about Greyhawk today. But before we do that, I want to make sure, okay. Just wanted to make sure I wasn't blowing you guys' ears out with the intro music there. You know what, I'll hang tight. I'll wait to see if anybody's going to join up on the YouTube stream right now. Hope everybody's having fun with their current ongoing campaigns and whatnot. Tomorrow, you guys get a twofer. We're going to have the regular Friday lunch stream, and then Friday evening, we're going to have a sit-down with Yang Yan Zhao. We're going to talk about religion and D&D. Now, I, of course, am going to bring my unique first edition AD&D perspective, but, you know, we'll get kind of a broader overview. Yang actually put out a few videos on it. This is the one that inspired me. Let's see if I can get this to copy and paste. I am live, aren't I? Hey KB, how are you? So yeah, he put up a video and I was listening to it, watching it, and it inspired me to talk about it because recently in the D&D lessons we've talked about player characters possibly becoming godlings, how planar travel and religions are handled and so on, but I didn't do a deep dive into best practices on handling religions in your D&D games, and I want to do that. I want to go into that a little bit on my own channel, but I wanted to talk to Yang because I felt like he had some interesting thoughts on the subject, and I'm not going to give anything away, but if you want to go watch the video that I linked, don't watch it now. Don't go now. I've only got a few people watching the stream as it is. But go check his video out. Go check his channel out. Subscribe to his channel if you like general D&D things. And pop culture and etc. Etc. But speaking of channels and subscriptions, guys, I was stunned. I was shocked. When I checked out the channel, the last time I looked closely at at the subs was actually yesterday or day before yesterday, and we were at 771, and I thought, oh, that's nice. We've jumped up to 779 subscribers on the channel. That's pretty darn amazing. Thank you guys. Thank you so much. So to our new viewers, if you're new to the channel and you haven't watched my videos before, or you've only seen a little bit and you haven't really dived into the channel, I made a deal with my subscriber base. When we hit 1,000 subs on the YouTube channel, I can't really follow the metrics of Facebook, so if you're watching on Facebook and you watch exclusively on Facebook, please come over and sub on the YouTube channel. Even if you go right back to watching it strictly on Facebook, please come over and subscribe to the YouTube channel. And regardless of whether or not you only watch on Facebook, like the videos and maybe leave a comment. on a video that you enjoyed. It helps with the YouTube thing. But the my promise, my covenant that I make with you, the subscribers, is when we hit 1,000 subs on this channel, and I'll explain why 1,000 is so important in a minute. Not 900, not 800, not 50. 1,000. Jehovah to you too, William Sova. From one bill to another. But when we hit 1,000 subs, I will host a virtual mini convention. I will host a gaming con online for you guys and anybody else who wants to stop by. But primarily for you guys as my way of saying thanks for dragging my channel out of the basement of 400 moribund subscribers to 1,000. Now, why 1,000? Look, I'll be 100% honest. When I get 1,000 subs, I can start monetizing the channel. I don't expect to get rich. I would need a magnitude 30 or greater number of subs to make any appreciable amount of money on YouTube. But it can help a little bit. So there are other things you can do when you get 1,000 subs, though, like post user polls. I can ask you guys questions on YouTube. I can do better thumbnails. I can do preview images and engage with you guys better on the YouTube platform, not just on the Discord. Yes, we have a Discord channel. And not just on Facebook comments, which I don't like doing anything on Facebook anymore. Those of you who know me, who might have seen likes or brief comments from me on Facebook, I just feel sick about it. I appreciate your opinions. I don't hang around with people who I think have shit opinions on things. I appreciate your posts. Two dear friends of mine have an adopted son, and they post the cutest things about him all the time. My nieces, or my niece Sarah, her grandma, my sister, post stuff about the baby on Facebook. I just don't engage on Facebook anymore. I don't do it because it's an awful place, and I don't like feeding that beast anymore. So unfortunately, that leaves me the Discord and YouTube to really engage with you guys, and YouTube has a hard ceiling. If you have 999 viewers, you're a nobody. If one more person subscribes to your channel, then you're somebody to us. So I'm striving to get closer to 1,000 subs, and we're going to celebrate getting 1,000 subs by having a virtual mini-con. I will take a day, maybe more, and run through virtual tabletop, original D&D, first edition AD&D, probably some Gamma World, definitely some Tales from the Loop, maybe even some Twilight 2000, could be some Fight in the Skies if I can find an inexpensive set of the rules, and so on and so on and etc. But that's my plan. That is my plan. So, of the active subs I've got right now, if each of you guys can tell 3 friends, hey, go subscribe to this guy's YouTube channel if you like gaming and geek-related stuff and topics, and, you know, click the notification bell and give a thumbs up to the videos you like, we'll get there like that. I mean, as it is, it's going to take a while. Might be after the first of the year. But I would certainly like it to be before then. So, you guys have done such an awesome thing for me, getting us up to the 779 subscribers. I'm saying 779 because it was 779 this morning, and YouTube spazzes out sometimes. Excuse me, I'm sorry. YouTube freaks out sometimes, and like, I know there's at least 4 of you in the chat right now. It says concurrent viewers 2, But then under Stream's analytics, this is concurrent viewers 1. I know there's more of you out there. So I looked at it this morning. It's at 779. I'm going with 779, even though on this PC, it's the indicator says 778. So help me, help you, help us all. And we'll get those sub numbers up, and then we'll have us a fine old time, right? Right. So now that we've had the daily analytics talk, and thank you so much for sitting here and listening to me ramble on like that, let's talk Greyhawk. Once upon a time, in a little town called Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, a man invented the first ever role-playing game, Dungeons & Dragons. And he built it out of concepts that he had originally created in chainmail. And unto this, the idea of a living and breathing world that was not Middle-earth, nor Hyboria, nor Lankmar, nor John Carter's Mars, or Earth, or the Dying Earth, or Melnibone, or any of that, but his own creation, his own confabulation. And of course, I'm talking about Gary creating the World of Greyhawk, his own campaign setting. Now, the initial Greyhawk map was simply a map of, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. The initial Greyhawk map, the very first one, was a modified wilderness event, outdoor survival. Almost a wilderness survival. Outdoor survival, which was a board game by Avalon Hill. You can still buy Outdoor Survival, by the way. If you want to play some serious by-the-book AD&D and get yourself a copy of Outdoor Survival, you can. But like many Avalon Hill games of the time, in addition to being in a bookshelf and having a Masonite fold-out game board with little chits that you moved around, the game board was hexagonal, perfect, because it's set in the wilderness. But instead of having the hexes represent a few hundred yards, Gary said that they represented 30 miles each. And various random features on the map that you could encounter, rather than being the wilderness hazards that were expressed in the outdoor survival rules, he said, okay, sinkholes represent castles. Little triangles that represent difficult hills represent cities, and et cetera, and so on. And that was the kingdom that characters explored when they weren't down in dungeons, or dungeon singular, the Castle Greyhawk dungeons, which we'll get into. Greyhawk, the city of Greyhawk, Castle Greyhawk, in due time, in the course of due time today. Well, when Gary expanded the world out, the map he used for people who wanted to sail across the ocean, walk not mere hundreds of miles, but thousands of miles, he just took a map of North America. And all the city locations on North America that he chose to keep became fantasy cities. And no, Greyhawk was not Lake Geneva. Greyhawk was Chicago. If you look at the World of Greyhawk map that came later, which we'll get into that, Greyhawk, you'll notice that the near dive is more or less in the shape of Lake Superior. So Greyhawk is about where Chicago would be in relation to that. So there's a little bit of trivia, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. But the initial place to adventure before Gary built any of that was Castle Greyhawk. Why Gary chose the name Greyhawk, I don't know, but it sounds pretty cool. And you had the ruins under Castle Greyhawk, the Castle Greyhawk dungeons, Well, the characters needed some place to base themselves out of, and Gary, borrowing, of course, once again, from great inspiration, the storied cities in Lankmar and Hyboria and so on, created a gritty urban setting, the city of Greyhawk, near enough to the castle Greyhawk. And the Legendarum slowly began to grow. And as certain players committed to certain activities, not the least of which were some of Gary's own characters, some of his own player characters. Greyhawk is Chicago? That explains some things. Yes, it does. But as Gary's players did certain things, they became famous or infamous. Some of them would create new spells. Some of them would create new holdings on the land and so on. So we got certain kingdom names, and we got certain place names, and we got certain spell names and so on that were defaulted to Greyhawk. I mean, one of Gary's favorite players, or one of Gary's favorite characters, was Mordenkainen. And if you look through the player's handbook, how many spells are named after Mordenkainen? And Luke Gygax, Melf, which is kind of a funny story. Melf came about because his character sheet was a note card. He didn't have a name for him. He just wrote character, male elf, M.ELF, Melf. So things like that all began to gel and create the personages. Is it personages or personae? I think it's personae. The personae of the world of Greyhawk. But what of the world itself? Dave Arneson's Blackmoor, which developed in parallel to Greyhawk, was, and I'll give it its due, was probably better developed than Greyhawk was initially. Indeed, the first adventure that TSR ever published is in Supplement 2, Blackmoor. It's Temple of the Frog. It's quite a fun little adventure. They cleaned it up later and released it for basic D&D, the DA series. Dave Arneson came back to TSR. For all those people who, think that Gary was a horrible pirate who, ruined Dave Arneson and threw him out into the cold, he was more than willing to come back and release the DA series, which was intended to be a multiple module series, but Gary left TSR and, again, those of you who think that, Gary is the villain in this story, Lorraine Williams told Dave Arneson to go jump in a lake, that she didn't want to continue publishing the DA series. So that went. But the Blackmoor supplement detailed at least somewhat the area of Blackmoor. And indeed, it is coterminous. It exists on Greyhawk and in its own separate reality. So lots of other companies started to look at the idea of published campaigns and modules, indeed. And Gary's thought was, no dungeon master in his right mind, worth the title, is going to want to buy pre-published adventures. They're going to want to make their own. Well, we see that the opposite was in fact true. So one might think, if you're not familiar with it, that the first publication from TSR to bear the name Greyhawk in its title would be an extensive going over an explanation, including maps and etc., for the Greyhawk campaign. It is this book here. This is Supplement 1, Greyhawk. with a little exception, a little tiny exception, and that's in something apocryphal. It's in an illustration. There is no World of Greyhawk information in this book. There are house rules for Gary's Greyhawk campaign, is what makes up Supplement 1 Greyhawk. So introduced here, we now have the Thief class. We have an expansion to what demi-humans can do. Percentile strength, weapons damage variation, monster hit dice becoming 8-sided. Is this where I just want to see? Player characters 13. So I don't want to blurt this out and then wind up with egg on my face. Oh, this is also where weapon versus armor type was introduced as well. Let's see. Monsters were tweaked, spells were added. But there is no Greyhawk campaign information in here. This is not a how-to guide on how to explore the world of Greyhawk. But a book needs a title, right? And why not take from your existing campaign? But on page... where is it? My copy's all beaten up and written in. It's damaged. Right in the front, it's got heavy writing and damage in it. Some guy named Gary Gygax and another guy named Rob Kuntz wrote their names in the front. On page 30, there is an illustration that says, "The Great Stone Face Enigma of Greyhawk." That's it. That's all. And it's too tiny. Like I would have to get up and run up to the camera and then try and adjust the focus. But that's it. That's all you got for Greyhawk information in your original D&D. Anything else you'd have to get from Gaming with Gary, and Gary was notoriously stingy about showing anyone those notes. And I mean, rightly so, right? So, going forward, Gary's Supplement 1 Greyhawk was not very Greyhawk, because Gary's thought was DMs would want their own campaign information. They wouldn't want to play in Greyhawk. Well, as the 70s began to give way to the 80s, lots of companies, not the least of which was Judges Guild, were starting to publish their own campaign worlds, and people were eating it up with a spoon. So two things happened. First of all, Gary decided to publish a World of Greyhawk setting, and second of all, he commissioned a new map. Now, the lovely Darlene, at the time, going by her full name, Darlene Peekle, had done some work for TSR. She had met... Now, if I've got this wrong, I interviewed Darlene last year, and I'd love to have her on the live stream again. I just want to have a good bank of art-related questions to discuss with her. I don't want She's not a gamer. She eschews gaming questions, which I completely understand. So I want to make sure I've got a good art-related question, bank of art-related questions. And maybe you guys can help me out with that. Some non-D&D art questions for Darlene. Just think about that, and going forward, we'll see if we've got enough to ask her to take time out of her schedule. But Darlene had gone to a mixer to meet some TSR folks. Didn't realize it was a job interview / portfolio interview kind of meeting. Brought some of her stuff to show to Gary, and he said, "Oh, I'll buy that one and 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 that," and all of it went in to various D&D books, and she found herself contracting for TSR. One of the things that Gary came to Darlene to do was create a new World of Greyhawk map. Now, unfortunately, I don't really, I can't show you the World of Greyhawk map. It's as big as this Lord of the Rings thing on the wall over here, which if you guys have seen the camera pointing at, you know how big that is. It's at least half as big. It's at least half as big. The World of Greyhawk map unfolded is gigantic. So I'm not going to put it out there, but you guys know the classic Greyhawk map that I'm talking about with her calligraphy on it. So she created that map. Gary saw it and immediately he told his home campaign, this is the new World of Greyhawk map. The map of North America, that's gone. This is our Greyhawk map. So he fell in love with Darlene's map, and so did millions of other gamers. And the first World of Greyhawk set that was released, and if you're smiling and looking over at your Greyhawk boxed set, I'm sorry. You're going to have to wait. You need to be patient for a couple more years. But in 1980, was it 80 or 81? 1980 was the World of Greyhawk folio. And right on the back, we've got a section of that lovely map. But it was this guy. And what was in this folder? Tantalizingly little compared to what was to come. We have the aforementioned maps. We have an explanation of the heraldry that goes around the... my copy is very beaten up, unfortunately. The heraldry that goes around the border of the cover art has a key to it, and it explains which kingdom uses which heraldry, which is nice to know. I mean, you can tell your characters, like if you learn heraldry, I don't know heraldry. So, an owl on a black background with its wings spread and its claws stretched out to the left and the right. Well, that is... I just want to make sure I got this right. So that's on the back. Or is that on the back? That is on the back. Okay. So that's the city of Rel Astra. So you can tell that to your characters and even show them a picture, and they don't necessarily know it. Now, there are ways to say certain things in heraldry, like, 3 lions rampant, bar argent, sinister. I was like, what the fuck does that mean? I don't know. I don't know how to say those things, or explain those heraldry things. But again, you can go through the heraldry and you can explain it to your characters, or to your players. So you got that. You got an explanation of how to read the grid coordinates, because the World of Greyhawk map is columnar grids, vertically oriented grids. So you can't simply say, oh, the city is located in square A23, and you go column A and you count down 23. It just doesn't work that way. So you've got to go down. You might have to go all the way down to a hex that's like literally 4 feet away on the map from the place you're going. Figure out in a straight line where it goes on the angle, and then from the top likewise. It's a very difficult map to use in that. But you got the World of Greyhawk maps. Now, I don't know if this was included with a World of Greyhawk set, but I'm inclined to believe it. But when I bought this folio, mine had the World of Greyhawk Fantasy Figures by Minifigs catalog sheet included in it. And when recently I was discussing minifigs being a creator of the first miniatures for TSR, not Grenadier, this is what I was referring to. So the World of Greyhawk minifigs. I don't know if that came with it, but it was in mine. You also got this thin book, The World of Greyhawk Gazetteer. This is basically it. You got 2 glossy maps, which they unfold into the standard Greyhawk map size. And assuming that the World of Greyhawk or the World of Greyhawk minifigs catalog did not come with the set, this, the Gazetteer. There's not much to this. Let's take a look at it. Hello, Landon Hughes. Good to see you. Welcome, welcome. And I do try to be careful with this folio. If you're looking for one of these folios, they're getting more expensive and hard to find. I bought mine back in 2003 or so, 2004, for the then princely sum of $45. I've seen them command several hundred now. So, but you can get a PDF of it, and you can have it printed. So the World of Greyhawk Gazetteer is 31 pages long. The back 3 pages are dedicated to portentous runes and glyphs, which you can use in your World of Greyhawk game. But herein, Gary explains countries, like here's the yeomanry. And we'll just take this. The yeomanry. His steadfastness, the freeholder, spokesman for the Yeomanry League. Doesn't give him a name. Just says what his title is. That's up to you. The capital is Loftwick, 6,000 people. The whole kingdom has a population of 100,000. Demi-humans, high elves, 2,000. Dwarves and halflings in numbers less significant. Humanoids, few. Many in mountains. Resources, foodstuffs, cloths, silver, gems. And then there's a short paragraph describing it. And it's basically a catalog of kingdoms. I mean, here's one short enough I can read it. Theocracy of the Pale. His worshipful mercy, the theocrat, supreme prelate of the Pale. Cleric, 14th level. Capital, Wintershiven. Population, 21,500. Population, 200,000. Demi-human, some. Humanoids, few. Resources, copper and gems. Foodstuffs, also. When Nyrend became a separate nation, the highly religious peoples inhabiting the area between the Rakers and Yall River likewise proclaimed their autonomy. Their clerical leaders were in effect ruling nobles, and one of their number was chosen as supreme for his lifetime. After warfare with their southern neighbor and a period of subjugation, the Pale became independent once again, and since then has enjoyed a history of reasonable rule and relative peace. Barbarian, humanoid, and bandit raiders plague the theocracy, but prelatal troops are tough and efficient and capable of handling most of the problems of this nature. A balanced force of horse and foot numbering over 4,000 guard the borders of the realm, while levies numbering more than 10,000 can be raised in a week. Note, the Pale is not noted for religious tolerance. The Pale has a very special part in my Greyhawk campaign. And then we have some maps indicating how, after the twin calamities, and that's something we should definitely touch on, how they spread out, how they migrated across the world of Greyhawk. There's a map indicating which kingdoms and their approximate borders. But let's talk a little bit about the history of the world of Greyhawk from within Greyhawk. In distant times past, two extremely magically powerful kingdoms. You had the I think it was the Flan and the Sewell empires were at odds. They were basically in the midst of a Cold War. And this is very interesting. Oh, Landon says, I bought that on drive-thru in PDF form just a few weeks ago. Oh, very nice. Greyhawk, or these two kingdoms, rather, in Greyhawk, ended up unleashing unimaginably powerful spells. The invoked destruction and the rain of colorless fire. And both kingdoms were effectively destroyed and their peoples scattered. The Sea of Dust in the world of Greyhawk, massive southwestern desert, is where once a green and verdant kingdom was. And it is now literally a gigantic sea of ash. The surviving peoples left their blasted homeland. Hello, Robert Conley, over on Facebook. They left their blasted homeland and spread out, migrating throughout Greyhawk. And there's a map that details that. But here's the interesting thing that sets Greyhawk apart, and a lot of people chafe at this. A lot of people wanted a timeline advance as time went on, and I guess they got it in 2nd edition and 3rd edition and so on. But Greyhawk is sort of frozen in amber when you as the DM take up the world of Greyhawk. It's up to you to advance the timeline. There were no forthcoming, then this kingdom invades that kingdom, this king dies, that queen rises, this artifact changes the world. There are these enormously important NPCs. Now, granted, a lot of Gary's important NPCs do exist in the world of Greyhawk. Bigby, Rigby, Mordenkainen, and not just Gary's PCs, but Rob Kuntz's as well. But you're not just going to trip over them exploring a dungeon and then they hold your hand or become your party's Gandalf. That's not how it works. You, the DM, you have a very broad and very open canvas on which to put your own details. Here are some mountains, here's some forests, here are some oceans, here are some cities. If you're playing the classic adventures, I don't remember if it's in the Gazetteer. Let's have a quick look. But if you're playing the classic modules, in one of the sets, they note where those places are located relative to the party's location. Oh, yeah. Here's an example. Rift Canyon Just south of Rift Canyon is a lonely volcanic cone of haunted White Plume Mountain, avoided by both knights and bandits. Advanced Dungeons and see Advanced Dungeons and Dragons module S2 White Plume Mountain. So it'll tell you where those are located. But there is no "you must" instructions in here. And for a lot of people, myself included, that's not quite enough. I like the idea of not being fettered, of not being told, look, the Great Green Plague comes in CY 580. It just happens. Now, if you want to sail on and not do that, that's up to you. But any official material is going to refer to this, and that's it. You got to deal with it. You can't ignore it. The modules refer to it. Future campaign information refers to it. Blah, 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 blah. If I want to have that, then I can. What I would have liked in the Greyhawk folio set, I mostly actually got in the Greyhawk boxed set. And that was some expanded information on some of the kingdoms, names of some important monarchs, a discussion of things like weather, which seems silly, but it's kind of important. You know? I mean, is it always like think about like the middle and northern middle sections of the map of Oblivion by Bethesda, one of their Elder Scrolls games. The occasional monster aside, it is like you are walking in a European nature park. Always sunny, or at worst, partly cloudy. And since I'm not a meteorologist, I don't want to say, oh yeah, freezing rain today, freezing rain. And then the next time the players are playing, it's like, okay, what's the weather like today? Oh, it's so hot, you can't march in your armor. Well, wait a minute. Of course, I could just tell them that the whole place is like northern Florida, in which case they're fucked when it comes to weather. How should I dress today? Layers, heavy coat, muffler, warm hat, and shorts and flip-flops. So we started to get some of that. Oh, interesting. Rob was saying over on his website, he's got he's sort of homegrown stuff, which is how you should do it. So for those of us who are hungry for more than just a handful of character classes and more than just some sketchy information, I don't mean sketchy like hey, I hear the the king of Nairon makes meth. No, that's not what I mean by sketchy. Just rough information. For those of us that wanted more. In 1983, TSR released this. This is the World of Greyhawk boxed set. This contains more durable versions of the maps by Darlene and 2 booklets. So let's take a look at what's in this. And this, yes, you can also get this in PDF format as well. I didn't realize the lid was on upside down. So let's take a look then at these 2 booklets and our maps. So here are our maps, and I'm not going to unfold it so you guys can see any details, but I just want to give you guys an idea. I am loath to unfold the maps in the folio set. They are on the verge of falling apart. But these are my maps for the box set, and their paper is heavier and tougher. So you get these bad boys. Oops, upside down. So that's one half of the World of Greyhawk map. It's like folding up the map. That's something you younger kids, you'll never have to cope with who folded the map wrong. All right, I think I folded that wrong, but I'll fix that later. So yes, again, 2 huge full-color campaign maps for you, the Dungeon Master, to put up somewhere to try and keep track of. Because folding that thing out at a table, oh, forget about it. Castle Anthrax is basically in New Orleans. I bought this during drive-thru. And a sombrero at 11. Castle Anthrax is basically in New Orleans. Yeah. But let's look at the books that you got. So there's 2 volumes in the box set. There's a guide to the world of Greyhawk fantasy settings, a catalog of the lands of the Flannis, and being the eastern portion of the continent of Eric of Earth. Oh, and that's something else. The world of Greyhawk is called Earth, O-E-R-T-H. Some people have said Gary pronounced it with like a city slicker, like Midwestern Chicago or Cleveland or even Brooklyn accent. Oith. It's Oith. I always said Earth, but, but names. So you might hear Greyhawk. You might hear Greyhawk referred to as the Flannis, or Auric, or the world of Greyhawk, or Earth. All of them, or Earth rather, all of them are essentially correct. Earth refers to the world itself, the globe, the physical thing that spins around its sun. No, I don't do a geocentric World of Greyhawk, even though it's described as such in the Greyhawk setting. If you look at the cosmology of Greyhawk, it's like, yeah, Greyhawk spins around, or the sun spins around Greyhawk, and a lot of people like that sort of pre-Enlightenment era approach. I don't. I just think it's because the scientists of Greyhawk believed in a geocentric rather than a heliocentric model. But then the Flannis is the broad eastern part of the continent of Auric, which would be analogous to the United States and North America. So you have these 2 books. Let's look at the fantasy setting first. Now, the one in the folio, the little thin glossography in the folio, the gazetteer in the folio, is 30 pages long. One of the 2 books in the World of Greyhawk setting is 80 pages long. Because we not only get the kingdoms expanded somewhat, and they're now in alphabetical order, I should point out. Let's see if I can find it. The Theocracy of the Pale. The paragraph is the same. Some are expanded a bit. But in addition to all of that, and we get names. For example, Ernst, we now have a name for the leader of Ernst. Her Noble Brilliancy, the Countess Bellisica of Ernst. We have names now.
Names is for tombstones, baby.
We have maps. We have regional alignments listed. And there's a sort of a Punnett square of lawful, neutral, good, evil, and chaos. And so you might have a kingdom that is lawful and neutral, so it will be a shield-looking icon. Lawful and good will be a balance. So you can use those icons on your map, or use those icons with this key on page 44 to understand how the alignments of a given kingdom in Greyhawk will go. I mentioned earlier when describing, there's a table of what things can be purchased in what kingdom. If we go over and we look at, say, the Great Kingdom of AD&D, well, there's everything there. Food, cloth, gold, copper, silver, gems. Just about everything you can imagine, Electrum, are in the Great Kingdom. Bodies of water are now listed and expanded on somewhat. That is, their descriptions are expanded on somewhat. Lesser hills and highlands, geographic features. Mountain ranges, there's rivers. Timberlands, not the boots or shoes, but timberlands. Wastelands, the bright desert, the dry steppes, the Rift Canyon, the land of black ice, which is where Blackmoor is, and the Sea of Dust. But perhaps most importantly and interesting of all, we come to the deities of the world of Greyhawk. And I'll read Gary's sort of splash paragraph here. The people of Earth worship many gods. Only deities of the central Flanus are described here, and of those, only the lesser gods in most cases have been detailed. In general, the greater gods are far too removed from the world to have much to do with humanity, and while they are worshipped, few people hold them as patrons. These deities have been known to intercede directly in the affairs of men, but only if these affairs have a direct and crucial bearing upon the concerns of the deity. Remember when we were talking about Greyhawk, or about the Dungeon Master's Guide, and talking about deity intervention? That's, to keep in mind. Deities have weighty affairs to attend to, and in general they cannot be bothered with the trivial needs of a party of lowly mortals. However, under certain circumstances, a demigod and a godling might well become embroiled in human affairs, as your further reading will discover. Because of the plots of Ayuz and various demons and evil elementals, St. Cuthbert has become actively aware of events and has indirect assistance from Beery, who resist elemental destruction. The enmity between Ayuz and St. Cuthbert may yet result in direct confrontation. So right there, Gary's setting up some world-shaking events. He doesn't hold the DM's hand and take them all the way down the path. But if you're playing Temple of Elemental Evil or getting ready to play Temple of Elemental Evil with your party, there's a little bit of info about that. And then we have a listing of greater gods and lesser gods. And the lesser gods get their due. And demigods also. And then there's a catalog of them. Now, in this book, they are not given stats, but rather their personalities are fully explained. Personally, I think they could have made this into one book and put all of the stats in there, because some of them are given in the glossography. And then Appendix 2 is social ranks and hierarchies of status. So we talked a little bit, again, in lessons in the Dungeon Master's Guide, about titles and so on. Well, Greyhawk has their own. Robert says, note each god has a cultural origin associated with him. Yes. So you're going to have some gods that are virtually unknown outside of certain societies except by name. And then in other cases, you're going to have gods that are damn near universal. Sorry, my throat's really giving me problems today, guys. So that's all contained in the first book. 80 pages of it. 80 information-packed pages. Not a line of text wasted, in my opinion. So what do we have then in the glossography? This book, for its thinness, is treated like a textbook or an encyclopedia as written by someone within the world of Greyhawk, which is why you get the geocentric world and its kind of wonky understanding of orbital physics and whatnot. Again, I don't do that. I don't have my prime material plane as, oh, there's phlogiston between the planets and heat is a liquid and so on and etc. I think the magical and the scientific can exist side by side just fine. It breaks my brain to do that. If it doesn't yours, that's fine. You don't have to do that. I'm just talking about Bill Sylvie. If for you Greyhawk is a flat plane, you want to have a little bit of fun with the whole flat earth thing, go for it. And again, on the cover, we get a section of the map. There's the near dive. There's the city of Greyhawk, divers. Even more castle makes an appearance there. The how to read the map grid coordinates section is here. And it's a little clearer and it's in color on the inside of the cover. But this is a glossography for the Guide to the World of Greyhawk, compiled by Pluffett Smedger the Elder at the Royal University at Relmond, Common Year 998. So this is actually set well after the players do their adventuring. If you start in 579 or 571. Chris says a disc on the back of Turtles. Why not? Why not? Let me see here. Sorry, I got a notification, and if it's from one of you guys, I want to make sure that I read it. But let's continue. So, old Pluffett gives us a foreword here. That's actually written by Steve Winter and Alan Hammock. The book you are holding, I'm not going to read this whole thing. This is column after column, and we're kind of running up against it. But there is a map key that indicates settlement types by population. Remember when we looked in the Dungeon Master's Guide, there were settlement types by population. Rates of travel. Timekeeping in a campaign is super important, and we're going to talk about that in an actual lesson. But timekeeping in a campaign, ever so important. All right, Chris, we'll see you. Have a good one. We're probably going to wrap up soon. You won't miss much more. But as timekeeping is important, knowing how big a Greyhawk hex is, it's 30 miles across, and how fast a party, either a foot or a horse, can move across a hex of woods or mountains or swamp or what have you, is equally important. So we have a rates of travel section here, and that includes traveling over rivers, lakes, or seas. Ponds notwithstanding. Now, something else that's interesting in this book, I mean, this is more of a dice rolling, meat and potatoes kind of thing. There are encounter tables. Now, you might think, well, the Dungeon Master's Guide gives us encounters. And it does, but if you're running the World of Greyhawk, you should basically install this as DLC on top of a generic D&D campaign. So when your party has a random encounter, there is a percentage chance that it will be from the World of Greyhawk setting first. And if it's not, If the percentage chance shows no, it's a normal encounter, then you go to the Dungeon Master's Guide tables or have it done beforehand. But you can run into elves, men, parties of clerics, druids, Rene folk, which are like river folk. They're a bit like, I think it's Gary's take on the Roma. And there's a huge amount of this information. Patrol encounter tables and what they might be made of. And then by major kingdoms, what you might encounter. Would they be more horseback? Well, not in a mountainous kingdom. And what you'd be more likely to encounter in each section. And it just goes on like this. And then it gives us mountain range possible encounters. Wastelands, over bodies of water. And you roll your percentage dice. You have your encounter. You roll percentage dice. And anything above the indicated numbers are just a standard out of the Dungeon Master's Guide encounter. We have a catalog of the rulers of Greyhawk. By name. I was big on that. And now we have a catalog of it. Weather in the world of Greyhawk. Not weather in the world of Greyhawk or some other world. No, we have the phases of the moon. We have degrees of longitude or latitude. Longitude. What's the one that goes that way? Latitude. And how weather might work in each area. Determining weather conditions. Now, there's a lot of stuff here for generating weather in the world of Greyhawk. Google Greyhawk weather generator and use that. Generally, all it will ask you to input is what latitude and longitude the characters are in. And then you click go, and it'll give you 30 days of weather. Just like rolling for random encounters beforehand, plot this out for major overland trips for the party. So you don't have like, it's snowing, it's 90 degrees. Unless you just want to do that. Then there are effects of the weather phenomena. Will your party get lost even if they have a ranger? There's a percentage chance for that. All of that in this book. Gary was very focused on weather. Now, I said before that Supplement 1 Greyhawk had no meaty adventures in it. Unfortunately, neither the folio nor the World of Greyhawk box set really give us much in the way of Greyhawk Adventures to have in terms of Castle Greyhawk and the dungeons underneath. Gary was planning on eventually that coming out, but there are adventure suggestions, outlines listed. It's up to you, to the DM, to build these adventures, but if you want to do that, the following wilderness scenarios have proven useful in capturing the atmosphere of the Flannis. Although apocryphal, they are based on events suggested by notes scribbled in the margins of the original recovered manuscript. Specific details of each adventure must be filled in by the Dungeon Master. So you've got Quest of the Mist Golem, the Werewolves of the Meadowood, the Lost Passage of the Sulwas, the Jungle of Lost Ships, the Copper Raider, the Stolen Seal. And then here on page 30 are adventure locales, where we have the A series. It gives us each hex location, 10 Tamacon, Ghost Tower of Inverness, Descent into the Depths, Vault of the Drow, Against the Giants, Dungeon Land, Land Beyond the Magic Mirror, Dwellers in the Forbidden City, The Secret of Bone Hill, Against the Cult of the Reptile Gods, Queen of the Demon Webs, Tomb of Horrors, White Plume Mountain, Expedition to the Barrier Peaks. And here we run into an interesting piece of trivia. The Village of Hamlet, WG1. Remember yesterday when I was talking about day before yesterday, I was talking about the Greyhawk module codes? Here, the Village of Hamlet is listed as WG1. The Lost Caverns of Sojkanth are WG3. It was intended that the Temple of Elemental Evil would be WG2. That threw me for a loop the first time I saw this. Determining a character's place of birth. There's a whole section covering that. And then birthplaces for demi-human characters. Personages and quasi-deities. This actually stats up some deities and some demigods. Deities of the world of Greyhawk. So we have St. Cuthbert's stats, 224 hit points. Bacchab the Uncaring, 354. And this also introduces unique powers to clerics of each religion. And this is something we'll talk to Yang about tomorrow night. This book already has the vanilla cleric being tarted up a little bit. So if you want to stat up a god or demigod and sick them on the party to see how they do, there's stats for a few of them in here. Not all of them, but if you remember, in here, Gary says, hey, most of the major gods don't concern themselves with the day-to-day business of mortals. They're far too above it. I've kind of broken that already a little bit, slightly, in my campaign, but we move on. So there you have it. There you have the campaign information for the World of Greyhawk. This does not touch on adventures, and this does not touch on supplementary material given by Gary in Dragon Magazine and other supplementary material that came in other modules. S4 and WG4, for example, are a good chunk of Greyhawk lore just by themselves. They're not just good adventures. Now, when Gary left TSR, Jim Ward and Rob Kuntz wrote a work that Jim says he's very proud of, Greyhawk Adventures, which was sort of dual statted for first edition AD&D and second edition AD&D. I consider it, at least Jim and Rob's works, as they're part of the Lake Geneva originals, to be canonical to Greyhawk. If you're sticking to first edition AD&D, if you're sticking to first edition AD&D and you want to run it as by the book, then yes, I would consider some of the adventures, a great many of the adventures in Greyhawk Adventures, to be canonical to AD&D. But once Gary was gone, TSR gave a gaggle of writers the chance to shit on Greyhawk, and they did. After WG6, further Greyhawk modules that came out got more and more ridiculous as they went on, culminating in post-Gygax TSR's module, Castle Greyhawk. It is not based on Gary's Castle Greyhawk. and every level and every encounter is a joke. If you read it and you think, hey, wow, that's, you know, if you kind of divorce yourself from the reality that was going on politically inside the Greyhawk, the TSR offices, you might think, well, that's kind of a weird tonal swerve. Why did they do that? And the simple fact of the matter is that they wanted to tear down Gary's works. Now let's talk about novels. A lot of people place the success of Forgotten Realms and Dragonlance, and rightly so, even if I'm not a fan of the writings, on the novels for those settings. While at TSR, Gary wrote 2 books involving his Gary Stu character, Gord the Rogue. They were set in Greyhawk, and they were published by TSR. Gary ignominiously left TSR, but he argued and won the argument that his character Gord, all the supporting characters, all the ideas, all the NPC names, and even a great many of the place names belonged to him. So with a couple of glaring and easily noticed name changes in the 3rd through 7th Gord the Rogue books, there's no separating those from Greyhawk. But the first D&D novel ever written was set in Greyhawk, but it wasn't written by Gary. It was actually written by Andre Norton. It's called Quag Keep. I've talked about it on the channel before. It's sort of the gamer's Dorkness Rising of its time, but it's not tongue-in-cheek. It's played seriously. Gary came down here to Central Florida, just one suburb over from me, back in the 1970s, and played D&D for a while with Andre Norton, who was a resident of these parts. And she, with Gary's permission, wrote a novel based on their adventure called Quag Keep. But her approach was, what if the players, or rather, what if the characters were slightly conscious of the fact that they were characters in a role-playing game, down to the point of having these bracelets with brackets on them that had little tiny dice that would spin when portentous events were about to overtake them. And so it does kind of break the fourth wall a little bit. But it's still, it's a good, fun read. It's not great. That mechanic is a little But if you want to read the first ever D&D novel, it's set in Greyhawk, and that's it. Now here's another interesting thing about Greyhawk. Many people whose first D&D, like, they consider like, oh yeah, I played old D&D. Back when I was like 5 and 6 years old, you know, my dad or my big brother played 2nd edition. Ooh. But they'll talk about, like, you know, yeah, Greyhawk was just kind of some notes, but man, the first real campaign setting was Forgotten Realms, and Greyhawk was just kind of pushed off as a second-tier thing. I don't have the quote in front of me. But you know what? I'm going to find it. I'm not going to leave this to... mere random discussion. We're going to look here. So Lisa Stevens was the last Greyhawk brand manager at Wizards of the Coast. Greyhawk sold, this is per Lisa Stevens of Paizo. Greyhawk sold almost as well as Forgotten Realms all the way through. People were clamoring for good Greyhawk material. Now, we can debate how good second edition Greyhawk was. You know, you had the Die Vecna die, you had the Greyhawk Wars with IUs, you had, there was like some plague that changed the map lines, and then third edition came in, and Radek was reduced to almost a rump state under control of the Pale, and Mordenkainen lost all of his hair, and Sean Reynolds goes around LARPing as him. But Lisa Stevens from Paizo says here, when they started third edition, the manager of D&D at the time decided we had too many campaign settings, so Greyhawk got put off to the side in favor of Forgotten Realms. It had everything to do with not starting the proliferation of game settings and nothing to do with sales, for the record. Greyhawk was always popular. Greyhawk was always popular. It was a political decision made by Wizards of the Coast to push Greyhawk out of the way. Probably because they were all a bunch of Forgotten Realms loving twinks. But that's the truth. That's the solid truth, guys. Greyhawk has always been a popular setting at TSR. So there you have it. And with that said, I think I've just about ranted and raved enough about Greyhawk today. Oh, I lost my... Oh, there it is. So we'll see you around, Chris. I know you'll be back soon. That's okay, IR. We'll discuss your message later. IR says, in my mind, Castle Anthrax is ruled by Edward Tun the Ogre. Sure thing. If you want to put Castle Anthrax in your Greyhawk campaign, awesome. Just tell me where the nuns of Castle Anthrax are at. But they're not allowed to use their real names. I'm going to answer, Robert Conley has bombarded me with questions in a good way over on YouTube, saying, how does one go from a flan god to a common god, for example? That's a good question. That's a very good question. And I think that's up to the individual dungeon master. So yes, tomorrow we'll talk a little bit about Greyhawk Adventures in Greyhawk, and some of my favorites, and some of your favorites, and maybe modules that you want to bring in to Greyhawk from other settings. One of the first things I remember asking Gary is, hey, where in Greyhawk is Keep on the Borderlands? You know, where optionally would you put it? Since Gary didn't do Mystara or Known World or whatever it is. So we'll talk about that some tomorrow, and tomorrow night, Religion Time with Yang Yan Zhao right here on the live stream. We'll see you guys then. Have an absolutely wonderful rest of your Thursday. Stay safe. Thanks for stopping by, everyone. It was good to see you all. Love you. I mean that. And, of course, lest I forget, thanks to my buddies over at Bards of Greyhawk for the music, guys. Love it. Summer Mountains, fantastic stuff. I'll see you guys around. Take care of yourselves. Peace.